Most people don't have a money problem. They have a pattern problem. And until that pattern changes, no paycheck will ever feel like enough. You can earn more and still stay broke. You can get promoted and still feel trapped. You can work harder every year and somehow feel further behind than you were 5 years ago. Because money does not amplify who you wish you were. It amplifies who you already are. And that is why some people build wealth quietly while others spend their entire lives chasing it like a moving target that never stops running. This audiobook is called __, quote, _0, __. And over the next chapters, you are going to learn something most people never truly understand. Wealth is not built in stores. It is not built through motivation. It is not built through appearance. It is built through identity. The way you think about time, the way you react to pressure, the way you spend when nobody is watching, the way you behave when you finally start making more money. Because the truth is brutal. Most people do not rise financially when their income rises. Their lifestyle rises first. And that single habit destroys more futures than lack of opportunity ever will. In this audiobook, you're going to learn how the wealthy think differently about ownership, debt, discipline, investing, emotional control, attention, risk, and freedom. Not fantasy, not fake guru nonsense, not overnight success stories designed for social media clips. Real principles, principles that survive recessions, principles that work in silence, principles that still matter whether you live in New York, Lagos, Mumbai, Toronto, London, Sao Paulo, or a tiny apartment where nobody believes in your vision yet. Because financial freedom is not geographic. It is psychological. And one sentence may completely change the way you see your life from this point forward. Poor people ask how much something costs. Wealthy people ask how much freedom it costs them to stay the same. Think about that carefully. Every subscription, every impulse purchase, every emotional shopping habit, every luxury you bought to impress people who barely remember your name, none of it was purchased with money alone. It was purchased with hours of your life. And once you understand that money is frozen life energy, everything changes. The wealthy understand this deeply. That is why they protect their attention. That is why they protect their mornings. That is why they protect their emotional state. That is why they build systems before they buy status. Most people want the appearance of wealth. Very few people are willing to build the behaviors that actually create it. And that is why this audiobook matters. Not because you need more information, but because you need a different relationship with money itself. Right now, somewhere in the world, there is someone earning half your income, building twice your future, not because they are luckier, because they learned one thing early. Money flows toward structure. Chaos repels wealth. If your habits are chaotic, your finances will become chaotic. If your emotions are chaotic, your spending will become chaotic. If your focus is chaotic, your future will become chaotic. Everything reflects the mind behind it. That is why this audiobook is not only about money, it is about self-control. The same person who cannot control impulse spending usually cannot control distractions. The same person drowning in unnecessary debt is often emotionally exhausted in other areas too. The same person constantly chasing validation usually struggles financially because appearances become more important than ownership. And ownership is the real game. The wealthy own assets. The average person rents appearances. One builds freedom quietly, the other builds pressure silently. You see it every day now. People financing lifestyles they cannot maintain, buying luxury phones while panicking over emergency expenses, taking vacations to escape lives they secretly hate, working jobs they fear leaving because their bills have become too heavy to carry. That is not freedom. That is performance. And social media made it worse, because now millions of people are spending money emotionally just to avoid feeling invisible. But here is what nobody tells you. The wealthiest people in the room are often the calmest people in the room, because real wealth removes noise. It removes desperation. It removes urgency. It removes panic decisions. It removes dependence on approval. Money does not solve every problem, but disciplined money removes unnecessary suffering, and unnecessary suffering drains human potential. How many dreams died because someone never learned how to manage money? How many talented people stayed trapped because they confused income with wealth? How many intelligent people remained financially anxious because nobody taught them emotional discipline around money? That changes now. This audiobook is your reset, not your fantasy, not your escape, your reset. And before we go deeper, understand this clearly. This audiobook is educational and motivational in nature. It is not personal financial advice. Always make financial decisions responsibly based on your own circumstances. Now let us begin with the first real shift. Chapter 1. Money does not respect emotion. Money respects patterns. That sentence alone can change your future, because most people spend emotionally and then try to recover logically afterward. They buy from stress. They buy from boredom. They buy from insecurity. They buy from comparison. They buy because they had a bad day. They buy because they had a good day. They buy because they want to feel rewarded for surviving another exhausting week. And little by little, emotional spending becomes emotional imprisonment. The scary part is that it rarely looks dangerous at first. It looks harmless. A few food delivery apps, a few subscriptions, a few impulse purchases late at night, a few upgrades, a few quote one moments, until suddenly your income disappears faster than your peace returns. And then comes the cycle. Work, stress, spend, regret, repeat. The wealthy study this cycle early. That is why disciplined people often become financially stronger than talented people, because discipline compounds. A person earning average income with elite discipline can quietly outperform a high earner drowning in emotional decisions. And this is happening everywhere in 2025. People earning six figures but living paycheck to paycheck. Creators making viral content while secretly buried in debt. Professionals with impressive salaries but zero ownership. Athletes going broke after retirement. Influencers renting lifestyles they cannot sustain. Because income without structure becomes leakage, and leakage destroys wealth invisibly. Imagine carrying water in a bucket with holes in the bottom. Most people try to solve financial problems by pouring in more water. The wealthy solve it by fixing the holes first. That changes everything. So before investing, before side hustles, before business strategies, before passive income, you must become emotionally dangerous to your old spending habits. You must learn to pause, because the pause is where power lives. The wealthy pause before purchases, pause before debt, pause before emotional reactions, pause before lifestyle upgrades. Most people react instantly. And instant reactions create long-term consequences. Think about how many financial decisions were made just to impress people temporarily. Cars, clothes, restaurants, watches, trips, apartments, temporary applause, permanent payments. That is one of the most expensive trades a human being can make, and here is another truth most people avoid. Many people are not buying products. They are buying emotional identities. They buy things to feel successful, to feel respected, to feel included, to feel admired, to feel worthy. But objects cannot permanently repair internal insecurity, which means emotional spending never truly ends until emotional awareness begins. That is why wealthy thinking starts internally first, not externally. The 1% think differently because they understand something the average person ignores. Every dollar has a job. Every dollar is a worker. And if you spend all your workers immediately, nothing remains to build your future while you sleep. That is why ownership matters more than appearance. One asset can quietly pay you for years. One emotional purchase can quietly drain you for years. And the difference between those two choices often looks very small in the moment. That is why awareness matters. Tiny leaks sink giant ships. A $5 habit repeated daily becomes thousands. A small unnecessary payment repeated monthly becomes years of lost investing power. A constant need for upgrades becomes permanent financial pressure. The wealthy understand delayed gratification, not because they hate enjoyment, because they love freedom more. And freedom requires space. Space to think. Space to leave toxic environments. Space to survive emergencies. Space to build dreams slowly without panic. Money gives options, but disciplined behavior creates money first. Never reverse the order, because if your habits stay weak, more income only magnifies the weakness. That is why the next chapter changes everything, because most people are not financially trapped by low income. They are trapped by invisible identity patterns they never questioned. And once you see them clearly, you can never unsee them again. Dear friends, we've just started working on this channel, so we'd really appreciate your support. Please like the video and leave a few words in the comments. It'll really help us promote it. We'd be very grateful. Let's keep going. Chapter 2. The Identity of a Wealth Builder. Before someone becomes financially free, they usually become financially different in private first. Different habits, different priorities, different conversations with themselves when nobody is around. Because wealth is not a number. It is a way of thinking repeated consistently over time. And most people never realize how much their identity controls their bank account. If someone believes money disappears quickly, they unconsciously spend quickly. If someone believes rich people are greedy, they subconsciously resist becoming wealthy. If someone believes they will quote too, their behavior eventually proves that belief correct. Identity always searches for evidence. That is why transformation starts internally before it appears externally. The wealthy are not perfect people, but they usually develop one critical trait early. They stop seeing themselves as consumers first and start seeing themselves as builders. That changes everything. Consumers ask, quote 3. Builders ask, underscore, quote, _4, consumers spend to feel temporary emotion. Builders allocate to create long-term leverage. Consumers chase comfort immediately. Builders tolerate temporary discomfort strategically. And this difference compounds for decades. Think about the average person after receiving extra money. A bonus arrives. A tax return arrives. A bigger paycheck arrives. What happens? Lifestyle expansion begins instantly. New expenses appear from nowhere. More subscriptions, better restaurants, new clothes, new gadgets, more convenience, more financing, more monthly pressure. And then something dangerous happens. Their standard of living rises faster than their level of peace. That is why many high earners secretly feel trapped, because income increased, but dependency increased faster. The wealthy think differently. When additional money enters their life, their first instinct is often protection and multiplication, not performance. They ask, quote 5, quote 6, quote 7, quote 8. That mindset shift separates temporary income from permanent wealth, because permanent wealth is built through retained control, and control is everything. When you control your expenses, you control your stress. When you control your impulses, you control your future. When you control your attention, you control your opportunities. The modern world profits from distraction. Remember that. Entire industries are built around making you emotionally reactive. Notifications, ads, endless scrolling, artificial urgency, limited time offers, status culture, comparison culture, all designed to weaken intentional thinking. A distracted person spends differently. A calm person sees clearly. That is why the wealthy often protect silence more aggressively than entertainment. Silence sharpens awareness, and awareness protects money. Look closely at society in 2025. People are overstimulated constantly, dopamine exhausted, emotionally reactive, mentally fragmented, and fragmented minds struggle to build structured wealth. Because wealth usually requires consistency more than intensity, not one perfect month. Years of controlled behavior. That is why financial success often looks boring from the outside. Budgeting, investing slowly, avoiding unnecessary debt, saying no repeatedly, living below means thinking long-term, ignoring social pressure. It does not always look exciting, but neither does planting a tree, until one day you realize the roots became powerful while everyone else was chasing temporary flowers. And this is where many people fail. They want visible success before invisible discipline. But invisible discipline creates visible success later. Never reverse that order. A person who learns financial discipline early gains an enormous advantage over someone constantly reacting emotionally to life. Because emergencies stop feeling catastrophic. Stress becomes manageable. Choices expand. Time becomes more flexible. Money management is really energy management. Where your money flows, your life flows. If most of your income disappears into consumption, your future weakens quietly. If part of your income consistently builds assets, your future strengthens quietly. Both happen silently at first. That is why patience matters. The wealthy think in decades while most people think in weekends. And this becomes obvious in spending behavior. Some people spend money to escape their current reality. Others invest money to redesign their future reality. Huge difference. One escapes temporarily. The other builds permanently. You can see this pattern everywhere. Someone works exhausting hours, then spends heavily every weekend because they feel emotionally deprived. That cycle becomes survival disguised as living. But builders think differently. They ask difficult questions. Quote 9 __. That single question can save someone years of financial pain. Because emotional purchases are often temporary anesthesia, not solutions. And here is something powerful to understand. The wealthy are not necessarily less emotional than everyone else. They simply build systems that protect them from emotional decisions. Automatic investing, saving systems, spending limits, asset allocation, long-term planning, delayed purchasing rules. Systems reduce self-destruction. That is why structure matters more than motivation. Motivation changes daily. Structure protects you when motivation disappears. And this applies to every area of life: health, relationships, discipline, money. The people who win long-term usually stop depending on feelings alone. Now think about your current habits honestly, not emotionally. Honestly, where does your money actually go? What patterns repeat every month? What emotional triggers cause spending? What environments weaken your discipline? Who influences your financial behavior? What are you trying to prove through purchases? Those questions matter because unconscious spending creates conscious suffering later, and suffering always arrives with interest. One of the most dangerous habits in modern culture is normalizing financial chaos. People joke constantly about being broke, about overdrafts, about impulse spending, about debt, as if dysfunction becomes less dangerous when it becomes socially accepted. But normalization does not remove consequences. A financially undisciplined life eventually creates emotional exhaustion. And emotional exhaustion destroys clarity. The wealthy protect clarity aggressively because clear thinking compounds better decisions. That means fewer panic purchases, fewer emotional reactions, fewer desperate choices, fewer financial emergencies. And over years, that stability becomes power. Not loud power, quiet power, the power to walk away, the power to rest, the power to say no, the power to think independently, the power to survive hard seasons without collapsing emotionally. That is real wealth, not just visible luxury. Luxury without peace is performance. Luxury without ownership is pressure. Luxury without stability is temporary. Never forget that. Many people look rich while privately drowning, and many people look ordinary while quietly building financial freedom. The difference is usually invisible in the beginning because wealth is often growing underground long before anybody sees it above the surface, just like roots beneath a tree. And here is another dangerous trap modern people fall into. They confuse access with ownership. Access is not ownership. Financing something does not mean you own freedom. Renting status does not create security. Temporary appearance does not equal permanent stability. The wealthy understand the difference deeply. That is why they focus on assets first. Assets are tools that continue working after the initial effort is complete. Businesses, investments, skills, intellectual property, real estate, equity, systems. These things can continue producing value repeatedly, but most people spend all their energy maintaining liabilities instead. Payments, debt, upgrades, interest, maintenance costs, social pressure expenses, and slowly their future becomes fully consumed by sustaining appearances. That is why identity matters first. Because if you still see money primarily as a tool for emotional comfort, wealth becomes difficult to sustain. But when money becomes a tool for freedom, leverage, stability, and ownership, your entire behavior changes. You become calmer around temptation, more patient around growth, less reactive to comparison, more intentional about time. And time is the hidden currency behind all wealth. The wealthy buy time differently. They understand something most people realize too late. You can recover lost money. You cannot recover wasted years. That realization changes priorities completely. Suddenly, unnecessary drama feels expensive. Impulsive living feels expensive. Constant distraction feels expensive because it is. Every distracted year delays momentum. Every emotionally chaotic year delays stability. Every undisciplined year delays freedom. But the beautiful part is this: small changes compound fast when repeated consistently. One controlled habit repeated for years becomes transformation. 1 hour studying money weekly changes thinking. One investment habit changes decades. One spending boundary changes stress levels permanently. One identity shift changes generations. Generational wealth rarely begins with millions. It usually begins with one person deciding, quote, 10. One person becoming disciplined, one person learning patience, one person refusing financial chaos, one person building quietly instead of performing publicly, and maybe that person is becoming you right now. Because the next chapter is where we begin separating survival thinking from ownership thinking completely. And once you understand that difference, you will never look at your paycheck the same way again. Chapter 3. The difference between being paid and becoming wealthy. Most people spend their entire lives trying to increase income. Very few spend enough time learning how to keep, grow, and multiply what they earn. And that is why someone can earn more in 1 month than another person earns in a year, yet still remain financially fragile. Because income alone does not create wealth. Behavior does. You must understand this deeply. A paycheck can change your lifestyle, but only assets can change your future. That sentence separates workers from builders. Now listen carefully. There is nothing wrong with working a job. Nothing wrong with earning a salary. Nothing wrong with starting small. The danger begins when a person depends entirely on active income forever without building anything beyond it. Because active income has limits. Your energy has limits. Your time has limits. Your attention has limits. And if every dollar you earn requires your constant labor forever, eventually exhaustion enters the equation. The wealthy understand this early. That is why they obsess over leverage. Leverage is one of the most powerful concepts in money management. It means creating systems where effort continues producing value long after the original work is done. A book, a business, a digital product, investments, a rental property, a valuable skill, content, equity, licensing, automation, ownership. The wealthy ask, quote, 11. Most people only ask, quote, 12. That survival thinking is understandable, but staying trapped there permanently becomes dangerous because survival thinking creates short-term behavior, and short-term behavior often sacrifices long-term freedom. Think about how many people immediately spend future money before earning it. Credit cards, financing, buy now, pay later systems, debt layered on top of debt. Modern society normalized borrowing against tomorrow to satisfy today. But tomorrow always arrives, eventually. And when it does, pressure follows. The wealthy are careful with pressure because pressure affects thinking. A financially pressured person becomes emotionally vulnerable. They tolerate toxic environments longer, make rushed decisions, accept bad opportunities, lose negotiation power, sacrifice peace for survival. That is why financial discipline is not just about money. It is about preserving your ability to think clearly. Clarity is expensive now. Distraction is cheap. Impulse is cheap. Convenience is cheap. But clear thinking that has become rare, and rare things become valuable. One of the reasons the 1% think differently is because they understand delayed gratification emotionally, not just intellectually. Most people understand patience logically, but emotionally. They still crave immediate rewards. And companies know this. That is why modern marketing sells emotion more than products. Quote, 13, quote, 14, quote, 15, quote, 16, quote, 17, quote, 18, all emotional triggers. Because emotional consumers are profitable consumers. The wealthy train themselves to pause before emotional spending, and that pause becomes financial power. Imagine two people earning exactly the same income for 10 years. One spends emotionally whenever stress appears. The other builds disciplined systems quietly. At first, their lives may look similar, but over time, the gap becomes massive because compounding is invisible in the beginning, just like debt. That is why financially intelligent people think differently about small decisions. Not because small decisions alone create wealth, because repeated small decisions shape identity. Identity shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. Everything connects. A person who constantly says, quote, 19, usually repeats that sentence hundreds of times yearly. And eventually, those small leaks become major financial damage. The wealthy understand accumulation, both positive and negative. A tiny disciplined investment repeated monthly can become life-changing over decades. A tiny destructive habit repeated monthly can quietly destroy decades. And here is where many people misunderstand wealth completely. They think wealthy people only focus on making money. No, the smartest wealthy people focus heavily on protecting money. Protection matters because earning without protection creates instability. That is why financially intelligent people prioritize emergency reserves, low unnecessary debt, multiple income streams, long-term investments, skill development, risk awareness. They know life changes quickly, economies shift, industries evolve, technology disrupts jobs, health emergencies happen, unexpected setbacks arrive. The people who survive these seasons best are usually the ones who prepared before the storm appeared. Preparation creates calm, and calm creates better decisions. That is why panic spending destroys so many lives financially. A person under constant emotional stress rarely manages money effectively, which is why inner discipline matters so much. You cannot separate financial management from emotional management. They are connected deeply. Someone constantly chasing dopamine through purchases will struggle building wealth long term because wealth often requires resisting emotional urges repeatedly, not once, thousands of times. This is why many wealthy individuals appear quote, 20, to highly impulsive people. Because disciplined living lacks the emotional chaos modern culture glorifies. But chaos is expensive, financially, emotionally, mentally. The wealthy do not necessarily avoid enjoyment. They simply avoid self-destruction disguised as enjoyment. Huge difference. And here is another important truth. Wealth is easier to maintain when your ego is small. Ego creates expensive decisions, trying to impress people, trying to appear successful, trying to compete constantly, trying to prove worth externally. That behavior creates financial leakage everywhere. The need for validation becomes a hidden monthly expense, and most people never calculate its true cost. Think carefully. How many purchases were made primarily because of social perception? The expensive dinner, the luxury logo, the unnecessary upgrade, the status vacation, the car payment stretching the budget, the apartment meant to impress visitors. Sometimes people are not building lives, they are building performances, and performances are exhausting to maintain. The wealthy understand something powerful. Real confidence rarely needs constant display. Insecure wealth performs loudly. Secure wealth moves quietly. That is why many truly wealthy people prioritize flexibility over appearance. Because flexibility is freedom. The ability to relocate, the ability to rest, the ability to invest, the ability to leave unhealthy environments, the ability to say no without panic. All of that comes from financial margin. Margin matters. If every dollar is already committed, life becomes emotionally heavy. That is why controlling lifestyle inflation is one of the most important financial skills on earth. As income rises, many people unconsciously raise obligations immediately. More expensive housing, more expensive habits, more expensive social circles, more expensive expectations. Soon, the new income feels emotionally normal, and the pressure returns again. This is called the hedonic treadmill. No matter how fast someone runs, their satisfaction keeps resetting. That is why many wealthy-looking people secretly feel anxious constantly, because appearance expanded faster than inner stability. But financially intelligent people grow differently. When income rises, they often increase investments before lifestyle. That single behavior changes entire futures, because invested money becomes future leverage. And leverage creates options later. Options matter more than appearances. Always remember that. The wealthy think in optionality, underscore, quote, underscore, 21, underscore. That question changes spending completely. Suddenly, impulsive purchases feel less attractive. Suddenly, ownership feels more exciting. Suddenly, freedom becomes more valuable than temporary validation. And that mindset shift is where real financial maturity begins, not when someone earns their first large paycheck. When someone learns to direct money intentionally instead of emotionally, that is, adulthood financially, direction. Most people drift financially because nobody taught them intentionality. School teaches compliance. Marketing teaches consumption. Social media teaches comparison. Very little teaches ownership. Very little teaches patience. Very little teaches asset building. Very little teaches emotional control around money. That is why so many intelligent people still struggle financially, because intelligence alone does not create wealth. Consistent behavior does, and behavior follows identity, which means if you still identify emotionally as a spender, money escapes quickly. But when you begin identifying as a builder, everything changes. You begin asking different questions. Quote, 22, quote, 23, quote, 24, quote, 25, quote, 26. Those are wealth-building questions. And questions shape focus. Focus shapes action. Action shapes destiny. Now here is something extremely important. The goal is not to worship money. Money is a tool, nothing more. But poor money management creates avoidable suffering. And avoidable suffering steals human potential. Imagine how many dreams disappear because people never created financial breathing room. The artist who quit too early. The entrepreneur trapped by debt. The parent overwhelmed by pressure. The talented student unable to focus because survival anxiety consumes every thought. Financial pressure narrows human vision. That is why financial discipline expands possibility. And possibility changes lives. Now, if this message is resonating deeply with you, pause for a moment. Ask yourself honestly, are you building a future or only financing a present? That question may change everything, because the next chapter is where we expose one of the most dangerous traps in modern society: looking wealthy while becoming financially weaker underneath. And millions of people are trapped inside that illusion right now without realizing it. Dear viewer, we would really be grateful if you could share your ideas on how we can improve our videos in the comments. Thank you very much. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Looking Rich. One of the most dangerous financial traps in modern society is this: people spend years trying to look wealthy instead of becoming financially free. And those are not the same thing, not even close. Looking rich is usually immediate. Becoming wealthy is usually slow. Looking rich demands visibility. Becoming wealthy often requires invisibility for a while. That is why so many people are trapped financially today. Because modern culture rewards appearance faster than discipline. A person can rent luxury, finance status, borrow image, lease perception. And social media turns all of it into performance art. You see someone smiling beside a luxury car. You see expensive dinners, luxury vacations, designer clothes, perfect apartments, perfect mornings, perfect lives. But what you rarely see is the pressure underneath: the debt, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, the constant need to maintain the image, the dependence on continued income just to sustain appearances. And slowly, people begin confusing aesthetics with achievement. But wealth is not aesthetics. Wealth is resilience, the ability to survive uncertainty, the ability to think long-term, the ability to absorb setbacks without collapse, the ability to buy time, the ability to protect peace. That is real wealth, not expensive photography. The wealthy understand something most people ignore. A luxury purchase too early becomes a financial cage, and cages are dangerous because they often look beautiful from the outside. Think about someone earning more money for the first time. Instead of increasing ownership, they increase visibility. Suddenly, every upgrade becomes emotional. A better car, a bigger apartment, more expensive habits, more expensive friend groups, more expensive expectations. And now, the person who once felt excited about earning more feels trapped again. Because the new lifestyle created new pressure. That is why the wealthy often move differently during early growth phases. They build foundations quietly first: investments, skills, cash reserves, business systems, ownership, low fixed expenses. Because they understand something deeply: the lower your unnecessary obligations, the faster your freedom grows. Most people do the opposite. As income rises, obligations rise immediately, and soon their future income is already spent before it arrives. That creates emotional heaviness. A financially overextended person cannot think freely. Every decision becomes survival-based. That is why minimalism can become powerful financially. Not because owning less is automatically noble, but because dependency weakens flexibility. The more expensive your lifestyle becomes, the more difficult it becomes to pivot your life. Some people cannot leave jobs they hate because their bills are too large. Some cannot pursue dreams because their lifestyle became too expensive. Some cannot rest because their obligations consume all breathing room. That is not success. That is polished pressure. And polished pressure is still pressure. The wealthy think differently about status. They understand status without stability. is fragile. That is why many financially intelligent people avoid unnecessary lifestyle inflation even after becoming successful, because they understand the emotional freedom simplicity creates. Simplicity protects peace, and peace improves decision-making. Remember this carefully. Financial stress changes personality. It changes sleep, patience, relationships, creativity, confidence, mental health. That is why financial discipline is actually emotional self-protection, not punishment, protection. Now let us go deeper. Why do people overspend emotionally? Because spending often becomes identity therapy. Someone feels unimportant, so they buy visible things. Someone feels exhausted, so they reward themselves constantly. Someone feels insecure, so they purchase symbols associated with success. Someone feels emotionally empty, so consumption becomes stimulation. And companies know this extremely well. That is why modern advertising rarely focuses on products themselves. It focuses on emotional transformation. Quote 27, quote 28, quote 29. But objects cannot permanently solve emotional insecurity. That is why many people keep upgrading externally while remaining internally anxious. No purchase heals lack of self-worth permanently, and until someone understands that money leaks emotionally forever. The wealthy understand delayed emotional gratification. This is critical. Most people think discipline means deprivation. No. Real discipline means strategic timing. It means asking, quote, 30. That question changes everything. Because wealthy people think beyond the emotional moment. They understand future consequences emotionally. Most people only understand present feelings emotionally. And that creates huge differences over decades. Now imagine two people again. Same salary, same city, same opportunities. One person spends heavily to appear successful immediately. The other lives below their means while quietly investing consistently. At first, the spender appears more successful publicly. Better clothes, better vacations, more visible lifestyle. But 5 years later, the investor owns flexibility, reduced stress, growing assets, more options, more peace, and eventually the gap becomes impossible to ignore. Because appearances compound socially, but ownership compounds financially. The wealthy choose ownership, always. This is why financially intelligent people become extremely careful about recurring expenses. A recurring expense is not one purchase. It is repeated future labor. That subscription, future labor. That oversized car payment, future labor. That expensive apartment beyond your comfort zone, future labor. The wealthy calculate differently. They ask, quote 31, quote 32, quote 33. Those questions create awareness, and awareness creates control. Most financial destruction does not happen dramatically. It happens quietly. Tiny leaks. Repeated habits, emotional decisions, uncontrolled upgrades, constant comparison, slow erosion, like water wearing down stone. That is why awareness must become daily. Because modern culture constantly encourages financial unconsciousness. Spend now, upgrade now, consume now, experience now, flex now. Rarely, build now, invest now, protect now, prepare now, and preparation matters more than hype, especially in uncertain economies. Especially in 2025, artificial intelligence is reshaping industries rapidly. Entire job categories are changing, attention spans are collapsing, remote work transformed lifestyles. Inflation pressures households globally. Digital distractions consume focus. In this environment, financial discipline becomes even more valuable because adaptability requires margin. A person with no financial margin becomes vulnerable to every disruption. The wealthy build margin intentionally: cash reserves, investments, low unnecessary debt, multiple skills, adaptable income streams, not because they fear life, because they understand life realistically, and realism protects people better than fantasy. Now let us talk about something many avoid: comparison. Comparison destroys financial peace faster than almost anything else. Because there will always be someone appearing richer, always. A bigger house, a newer car, a better vacation, more followers, more visible success. If your happiness depends on external comparison, peace becomes impossible. And impossible peace creates endless spending. The wealthy often become selective about who influences them emotionally, because environment shapes standards. If surrounded constantly by people obsessed with appearances, pressure increases. But if surrounded by builders, ownership becomes normal. That is why protecting your mental environment matters financially. What you consume mentally affects what you consume financially. Very few people realize this, but attention is connected to spending behavior deeply. A distracted person buys impulsively. An insecure person buys emotionally. A patient person buys intentionally. That is why emotional regulation is one of the highest financial skills on earth. Not investing knowledge alone, emotional regulation, because most people already know basic financial truths. Spend less than you earn. Avoid destructive debt. Invest consistently. Build savings. The difficulty is behavioral consistency, not information. And behavior always reveals identity. That is why this audiobook keeps returning to identity repeatedly. Because without identity change, temporary motivation fades. Someone can watch motivational content for hours, then emotionally spend money 10 minutes later. Why? Because identity remained unchanged. The wealthy identify differently. They identify as owners, builders, long-term thinkers, protectors of future freedom. And identity influences behavior automatically over time. Now here's a powerful sentence. The goal is not to become cheap. The goal is to become intentional. Huge difference. Intentional people still enjoy life, travel, experiences, beauty, celebration, but they do not destroy tomorrow to entertain today. That balance matters because extreme deprivation can become unhealthy too. The point is conscious control, not fear. The wealthy control money emotionally instead of letting money control them emotionally. That creates calm. And calm is one of the greatest luxuries in modern life. A calm person thinks clearly, sleeps better, negotiates better, builds patiently, avoids desperation. Calm compounds into better decisions, and better decisions compound into better lives. Now, maybe nobody ever taught you these things before. Maybe. You grew up surrounded by financial stress. Maybe money always felt chaotic. Maybe survival thinking became normal. Maybe nobody modeled healthy financial behavior around you. But awareness changes cycles, and cycles can end with one disciplined decision repeated consistently. One boundary, one investment habit, one refusal to perform for strangers, one commitment to ownership instead of appearance. That is how quiet financial revolutions begin. Not loudly, quietly. And in the next chapter, we are going to talk about the one thing almost nobody learns early enough. Why the wealthy protect time more aggressively than money itself. Because once you understand the real value of time, you stop wasting both your life and your income the same way ever again. Chapter 5. Time is the real currency. Most people spend their lives chasing money while wasting the thing money can never replace: time. And the wealthy understand this earlier than most. That is why financially intelligent people think differently about every hour. Because eventually they realize something powerful. Money can be recovered. Time cannot. You can lose thousands and rebuild. You can fail financially and recover. You can restart businesses, restart careers, restart investments. But no human being can recover wasted years. That realization changes priorities forever. Suddenly distractions feel expensive. Drama feels expensive. Impulse feels expensive. Lack of discipline feels expensive. Because all of it consumes life itself. And life is the ultimate asset. Think about how many people trade decades of their future just to maintain lifestyles they barely enjoy. Working constantly, not to build freedom, but to sustain pressure. That is one of the saddest financial traps in modern life. A person wakes up exhausted, works a job they secretly resent, spends money emotionally to feel temporary relief, creates more obligations, then must work even harder to maintain those obligations. And slowly, years disappear, not because they lacked potential, because they never learned to protect time. The wealthy protect time aggressively, not lazily, not irresponsibly, strategically, because time allows. Thinking, building, creating, learning, recovering, growing, designing a meaningful life. Without time, even high income can feel like emotional imprisonment. That is why many wealthy people become obsessed with leverage. Leverage buys back time. Investments can buy time. Businesses can buy time. Systems can buy time. Skills can buy time. Automation can buy time. Passive income can buy time. The wealthy ask constantly, quote, _34, _. Most people never ask this question deeply enough. They only focus on increasing hourly income. But eventually, everyone reaches a limit. There are only so many hours in a day. That is why the wealthy focus on ownership. Ownership separates labor from income over time. And once you understand this, you stop seeing money the same way. Every dollar becomes potential future freedom or future dependency, depending on where it flows. Now think carefully about your current financial behavior. Are your purchases buying freedom or increasing future obligations? That question alone can transform an entire life, because obligations cost more than money. They cost mental space. A financially overwhelmed person carries invisible weight constantly. Bills, payments, debt, deadlines, financial anxiety. That emotional heaviness affects everything: focus, relationships, creativity, health, sleep, confidence. And eventually, many people become so mentally overloaded, they stop dreaming entirely. They enter survival mode permanently. Wake up, work, recover, repeat. Years pass quietly. And this happens to millions of intelligent people, not because they are incapable, because nobody taught them how expensive unconscious living becomes over time. The wealthy think differently about small daily choices because they understand accumulation emotionally. A wasted hour repeated daily becomes years. An impulsive habit repeated weekly becomes financial pressure. A distracted lifestyle repeated monthly becomes lost momentum. Everything compounds, both destruction and growth. That is why disciplined people often outperform talented people long term, because discipline protects time, and protected time creates momentum. Momentum is powerful. A person consistently improving skills for 1 hour daily becomes dangerous over years. A person consistently investing monthly builds enormous advantage over decades. A person consistently reducing distractions gains clarity most people never experience. Small repeated actions become identity. Identity becomes destiny. Now let us go deeper into something uncomfortable. Many people say they want financial freedom, but their daily behavior says they want emotional comfort more. Huge difference. Freedom often requires delayed gratification, discomfort, patience, temporary sacrifice, quiet consistency. Comfort seeks immediate relief. Scrolling, overspending, avoidance, entertainment addiction, constant stimulation, and modern culture aggressively rewards comfort behavior because distracted people consume more. Think about how much of modern technology is designed to capture attention. Notifications, infinite feeds, algorithms, entertainment loops, endless recommendations. Why? Because attention became one of the most valuable currencies on earth. And where attention flows, money follows eventually. The wealthy know this. That is why many successful people become extremely protective of focus. Focus creates leverage. A distracted person rarely builds anything substantial long-term, not because they lack intelligence, because fragmented attention destroys consistency, and consistency builds almost everything valuable: wealth, health, mastery, relationships, business, peace, consistency. That is why the wealthy often simplify life strategically. Less noise, less chaos, less unnecessary consumption, less emotional clutter. Simplicity strengthens focus. And focused people move differently. They make fewer emotional decisions. They waste less energy proving themselves. They stop chasing every opportunity. They think longer term. That calm intentionality creates massive financial advantages over time. Now imagine two individuals again. One spends most evenings distracted, scrolling endlessly, consuming content, escaping stress through stimulation. The other spends even one focused hour daily building skills, investing knowledge, planning, or creating systems. At first, the difference seems invisible, but after 5 years, completely different lives, because attention compounds too. The person protecting attention usually protects money better too. Everything connects. And this is where many people fail financially, not because they are lazy, because they are overstimulated. Overstimulated minds struggle with patience, and patience is essential for wealth building. The wealthy understand this deeply. They know real wealth rarely arrives instantly. It grows quietly, while most people lose interest searching for faster excitement. That is why so many people constantly restart financially. New trends, new schemes, new hype, new emotional decisions. But wealth often rewards boring consistency more than emotional intensity. Invest regularly, improve skills consistently, reduce unnecessary spending, protect attention, avoid destructive debt. Think long-term, simple principles, repeated long enough, they become extraordinary. Now let us talk about something very important. Freedom is not only financial, it is psychological. A person can earn good money, yet still feel emotionally trapped. Why? Because freedom also requires internal control. Control over impulses, control over ego, control over comparison, control over emotional spending, control over attention. Without self-control, external success becomes difficult to sustain. That is why many lottery winners go broke. Many athletes lose fortunes. Many influencers collapse financially. Income arrived faster than identity evolved. And without internal structure, money escapes quickly. The wealthy usually build internal structure first or learn painfully why it matters. Now here is a sentence worth remembering forever. The quality of your future depends heavily on what you repeatedly give your time to today. Read that again, mentally. Because your future is not built someday. It is built daily. One decision at a time, 1 hour at a time, one financial habit at a time. And most people underestimate how powerful ordinary days become when repeated for years. The wealthy think in decades. That changes behavior dramatically. Instead of asking, quote, 35, they ask, quote, 36. That question protects time, protects money, protects energy, protects peace. Now maybe right now your life feels financially overwhelming. Maybe you feel behind. Maybe you made mistakes. Maybe nobody taught you these principles growing up. Maybe you are trying to rebuild quietly while carrying pressure nobody sees. Listen carefully. Your current situation does not permanently define your future, but your repeated habits eventually will. That is empowering, because habits can change, slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly, but permanently. And once disciplined habits begin compounding, life changes faster than most people expect. Not overnight, but steadily. The wealthy trust steady progress emotionally. Most people abandon progress because they crave visible results too quickly. But invisible progress matters most in the beginning. Roots grow underground first. Always remember that. The strongest trees spend long periods growing where nobody applauds them. Human lives work. Similarly, quiet discipline creates loud outcomes later. And the next chapter may be one of the most important in this entire audiobook, because now we are going to expose how debt quietly steals not only money, but identity, confidence, peace, and future freedom itself. And most people do not realize the true psychological cost until years later. We're so glad you decided to watch our video. We're also really curious to know which cities around the world are watching our videos. Could you let us know which city, or at least which country, you're from? We always read every comment under our videos carefully. Thank you. Chapter 6. Debt is more than money. Owed. Debt is not always visible. Sometimes it looks like stress. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like staying in environments you secretly outgrew because financially you feel trapped. And that is why debt is far more dangerous psychologically than most people realize. Because debt changes behavior. A person carrying heavy financial pressure thinks differently, sleeps differently, dreams differently. That pressure becomes emotional weight. And emotional weight changes how someone moves through life. Now listen carefully. Not all debt is automatically evil. There is strategic debt, productive debt, calculated debt used to acquire appreciating assets or expand opportunity responsibly, but destructive debt, the kind driven by impulse, ego, emotional spending, or lack of awareness. That kind silently steals freedom year after year. The wealthy understand this distinction deeply. Most people only hear debt is normal, but normal does not always mean healthy. Modern society normalized financial pressure so deeply that many people no longer realize how emotionally damaging constant debt can become. Think about this honestly. How many people wake up already mentally exhausted before the day even starts? Not because life itself defeated them, because obligations are crushing them quietly. Payments, interest, bills, deadlines, financial uncertainty. It becomes invisible emotional noise running constantly in the background, and background stress slowly drains human energy. That is why the wealthy often prioritize reducing unnecessary liabilities aggressively, not because they hate enjoying life, because they understand something critical. Every unnecessary debt payment steals future flexibility, and flexibility is power. A person with financial flexibility can make clearer decisions, take better opportunities, leave toxic situations, rest strategically, think long-term. But a financially trapped person often becomes reactive. Fear enters the equation, and fear changes everything. Fear makes people accept less than they deserve. Fear makes people stay stuck. Fear makes people emotionally impulsive. Fear weakens patience. That is why debt is often psychological before it becomes mathematical. Now let us go deeper. Why do people fall into destructive debt patterns? Sometimes survival, sometimes emergencies, sometimes lack of education, but often emotion. Emotional spending creates emotional debt. Someone feels insecure, so they buy status. Someone feels lonely, so they spend for stimulation. Someone feels exhausted, so they constantly reward themselves financially. Someone feels behind in life, so they overspend trying to catch up visually. And modern systems encourage this behavior constantly. Buy now, pay later, easy monthly payments, instant approval, zero down, fast financing. The world wants consumption immediately because emotionally reactive consumers are profitable. But the wealthy think differently. They understand financing comfort too aggressively can quietly finance future suffering. That is why financially intelligent people ask difficult questions before taking on obligations. Will this create freedom or pressure? Will this increase my future options or reduce them? Am I buying this from logic or emotion? Can I still breathe financially if life changes suddenly? Those questions protect people. Most financial disasters begin when people stop asking honest questions. And honesty matters, especially with yourself. Many people pretend they are financially stable while privately panicking. That performance becomes emotionally exhausting because pretending drains energy too. The wealthy usually prioritize reality over image. Reality allows adjustment. Image creates denial, and denial is expensive. One of the most dangerous financial habits is pretending small problems will disappear without action. Interest grows silently. Habits compound silently. Pressure builds silently. Then one day someone realizes they are carrying years of financial decisions emotionally. That realization can feel crushing, but awareness creates power again. Never forget that. A person who finally becomes honest financially often begins rebuilding faster than they expect, because clarity removes illusion, and illusion keeps people stuck. Now here is something important. Debt often delays dreams quietly. A person wants to start a business, but debt pressure makes risk feel impossible. Someone wants to change careers, but obligations make flexibility dangerous. Someone wants peace, but payments consume all breathing room. That is why financial discipline is deeply connected to personal freedom, not just numbers. Freedom. And freedom matters emotionally more than most people realize. Because freedom restores dignity, the ability to choose, the ability to pause, the ability to think without panic, the ability to say no, the ability to protect mental health. These things matter enormously, and they become difficult when debt dominates life emotionally. Now, think carefully about modern culture. Many people celebrate purchases publicly while hiding consequences privately. That creates distorted perception. Young people see lifestyles online constantly without seeing the financial reality underneath. Luxury apartments, luxury cars, travel, designer brands, visible success. But visibility does not equal ownership, and ownership matters. The wealthy focus on net worth quietly, while many people focus on appearance loudly. Huge difference. One builds strength, the other builds perception. Perception cannot pay bills during hard seasons. Assets can. That is why the wealthy become obsessed with reducing destructive liabilities over time. Not because they fear money, because they value peace. Peace is one of the highest forms of wealth. A peaceful mind makes better decisions. A peaceful mind sees opportunities. A peaceful mind builds patiently. A peaceful mind resists desperation. Debt pressure disrupts peace constantly. That is why paying down destructive debt can feel emotionally transformative, not only financially, psychologically, because every reduced obligation restores breathing room, and breathing room changes how people think. Now let us talk about something many avoid discussing: lifestyle debt. This is dangerous because it becomes socially invisible. Someone increases income, then instantly increases expenses to match. More expensive rent, more expensive habits, more expensive circles, more expensive expectations. Soon the higher income creates no real freedom at all, only upgraded pressure. This happens constantly. People earning far more than they did years ago, yet feeling equally anxious financially. Why? Because lifestyle expanded faster than ownership. The wealthy resist this trap carefully. They understand something powerful. A lower-cost life with strong assets often creates more happiness than a high-cost life built entirely on pressure, because pressure consumes emotional bandwidth, and emotional bandwidth affects everything: your focus, your relationships, your health, your creativity, your confidence. That is why reducing unnecessary obligations can feel like reclaiming identity. Suddenly, the future feels possible again. Now here is another important truth. Shame keeps many people financially stuck. They avoid looking at numbers, avoid budgets, avoid bank statements, avoid difficult conversations because facing reality feels emotionally uncomfortable. But avoidance compounds damage, always. The wealthy face reality early, even painful reality, because awareness allows strategy. Denial destroys strategy, and maybe right now, you need honesty more than motivation. Maybe the breakthrough begins with finally facing your financial patterns directly. No shame, no self-hatred, no pretending, just truth. Because truth creates direction, and direction creates momentum. Now listen carefully to this sentence. Financial freedom is not built through perfection. It is built through repeated correction. That matters. You do not need a flawless past. You need intentional behavior moving forward. Small improvements matter enormously over time. Reducing one destructive habit, paying down one obligation consistently, building one emergency reserve slowly, learning one investment principle, increasing one valuable skill. Small disciplined actions compound into completely different lives. The wealthy understand compounding emotionally. Most people quit before compounding becomes visible. That is why patience is wealth, not only financially, emotionally. Patient people think differently, spend differently, build differently, and builders eventually separate themselves from consumers dramatically over years. Now imagine your future self 5 years from today. Would that version of you thank you for today's financial habits? That question matters deeply because future freedom is being designed right now through ordinary daily decisions, not dramatic moments, daily patterns. And the next chapter may challenge almost everything modern culture taught you about success. Because now we are going to talk about why the wealthy become obsessed with ownership instead of consumption. And once you understand the true power of ownership, you stop chasing temporary validation and start building permanent leverage instead. Chapter 7. Ownership changes everything. The moment you stop asking, quote, 43, and start asking, quote, 44, your financial life begins changing permanently. Because ownership is where leverage begins. Ownership is where dependence starts shrinking. Ownership is where options begin expanding. Ownership is where freedom quietly starts growing beneath the surface. And the wealthy understand this deeply. That is why they spend years building assets while many people spend years building appearances. One creates future income. The other creates future pressure. Now listen carefully. Ownership is not only about property. It is about control, owning skills, owning intellectual property, owning businesses, owning investments, owning systems, owning equity, owning your attention, owning your time. The wealthy obsess over ownership because ownership creates leverage beyond labor, and leverage changes the rules of life. A person who only trades time for money stays dependent on constant output. But ownership allows money, systems, or assets to continue producing value even when you are not actively working every minute. That changes emotional pressure dramatically. Now think about modern society honestly. Most people are trained from childhood to become excellent consumers. Consume content, consume products, consume trends, consume upgrades, consume distractions. But very little teaches people how to become builders. And builders think differently. Consumers ask, quote, 45 builders ask, quote, 46, consumers. Focus on visible rewards. Builders focus on invisible foundations. That difference compounds into entirely different futures because invisible foundations eventually create visible freedom. The wealthy understand patience emotionally. That is why they tolerate delayed gratification better than most. And delayed gratification is not punishment. It is strategic self-respect. It means refusing to destroy tomorrow for temporary stimulation today. Now let us talk about why ownership matters psychologically. Ownership creates confidence differently than consumption. Consumption creates temporary emotional highs. Ownership creates stability. Huge difference. A new purchase may create excitement for a few days, but an asset creating income quietly for years creates peace. And peace is one of the greatest luxuries on earth. A peaceful person thinks differently, moves differently, builds differently. That is why financially intelligent people often become less interested in impressing strangers over time, because once someone experiences the emotional calm of true stability, surface-level validation loses power. Now imagine two individuals again. One spends heavily maintaining appearances. The other quietly acquires assets. At first, the spender often receives more social attention. People notice visible lifestyle signals quickly. But years later, the owner has options. The spender has obligations. And obligations change behavior. A person buried under obligations becomes emotionally reactive. A person with ownership becomes emotionally steadier. That is why the wealthy protect ownership aggressively, because ownership protects freedom. Now, here is something powerful to understand. Every asset you build becomes a worker. Think about that carefully. An investment account, a business system, a valuable skill, a digital product, rental income, royalties, equity. Each becomes something working alongside you. Most people never build enough financial workers, so they remain the only engine supporting their entire life forever. That creates exhaustion eventually. The wealthy reduce dependence on personal labor over time through ownership, not laziness, strategy, because they understand human energy has limits. Now let us go deeper into skills. Skills are assets too, especially in 2025. The world is changing rapidly. Artificial intelligence is transforming industries. Automation is replacing repetitive tasks. Attention economies dominate business. Digital leverage expands opportunities globally, which means valuable skills became more important than ever. Communication, sales, leadership, writing, problem-solving, technology, marketing, creative thinking, emotional intelligence, adaptability, these are ownership tools, because highly valuable skills create leverage repeatedly. And unlike trends, strong skills travel across industries and economic changes. That is why the wealthy invest heavily in self-education. Not because they love information, because knowledge compounds financially when applied consistently. A single skill can change someone's entire trajectory. One skill learned deeply can create higher income, better opportunities, more confidence, business creation, independence. That is ownership too. Now here is another truth most people ignore. The wealthy buy assets first, luxuries later. Most people reverse the order, and reversing the order creates decades of pressure. Think carefully about this. A person who builds assets early may eventually buy luxuries comfortably from passive growth. But a person chasing luxury first often delays asset building for years. Those lost years matter enormously because of compounding. Compounding is one of the most powerful forces in wealth creation. Tiny, consistent growth repeated long enough becomes extraordinary. That is why time matters so much financially. A person investing steadily over decades often outperforms someone trying to get rich quickly through emotional decisions. Slow consistency defeats emotional chaos almost every time, and the wealthy trust consistency emotionally. Most people trust excitement emotionally. That difference changes everything. Now let us talk about emotional ownership. This matters more than people realize. Many people do not own their attention anymore. Notifications control them. Algorithms control them. Trends control them. Comparison controls them. But the wealthy understand focus itself became an asset. Because focused people build faster, a distracted mind struggles, creating leverage. That is why many successful people intentionally reduce noise. Less drama, less comparison, less digital overload, less emotional clutter, because clarity improves decision-making. And decision-making compounds. One clear decision repeated consistently changes lives. Now imagine your mind like financial real estate. What occupies it daily? Fear, comparison, impulse, noise, distraction, or intentionality? Learning, planning, creation, growth? Mental ownership matters because your attention eventually shapes your financial behavior. That is why many financially disciplined people become selective about environments too. Environment influences standards quietly. If surrounded constantly by consumption culture, spending pressure increases. If surrounded by builders, ownership becomes emotionally normal. That is why protecting your circle matters financially. Now let us talk about one of the greatest lies modern culture sells. The lie that visible luxury equals success. It does not. Many people with visible luxury own very little. Many people with quiet lifestyles own enormous assets. Never confuse visibility with stability. The strongest financial foundations are often invisible in the beginning, just like roots underground. And roots matter more than leaves during storms. Always remember that. Economic storms expose weak foundations quickly. That is why the wealthy prioritize resilience, emergency reserves, diversified investments, multiple skills, reduced unnecessary liabilities, long-term thinking. These create durability. Durability matters more than hype, especially in uncertain times. Now here is a sentence worth remembering forever. If your lifestyle depends entirely on continuous high output with zero margin, you are not free yet. Freedom requires breathing room to think, breathing room to recover, breathing room to pivot, breathing room to create. Ownership creates breathing room slowly, and breathing room changes emotional health dramatically. The wealthy understand this deeply. That is why many wealthy individuals care less about looking impressive and more about maintaining flexibility, because flexibility is hidden power, the power to say no, the power to wait, the power to negotiate, the power to survive uncertainty calmly. Now, maybe right now, your ownership feels small. That is okay. Every empire starts tiny. Every investment account starts small. Every business starts uncertain. Every skill starts awkwardly. Every transformation starts invisibly. The key is repetition. Repeated ownership behavior changes identity, and identity changes destiny. That means saving consistently matters. Investing consistently matters. Learning consistently matters. Building consistently matters, not because results appear instantly, because repetition creates compounding, and compounding rewards patience enormously. Most people quit before compounding becomes emotionally visible. That is why discipline matters so much. The wealthy often look patient publicly because they trust long-term mathematics privately. Now, think carefully about your future. What assets are you building today that can continue serving you years from now? Not emotionally, honestly, because that answer reveals whether you are primarily consuming or becoming an owner. And ownership changes everything. The next chapter may completely change how you think about spending forever, because now we are going to talk about why emotional discipline is the real foundation behind every wealthy mindset on earth. Without emotional control, money disappears. With emotional control, even ordinary income can become extraordinary over time. Chapter 8. Emotional discipline creates financial freedom. Most people think wealth is built through intelligence. But if intelligence alone created wealth, far fewer smart people would be financially stressed. The truth is harder than that. Wealth is often built through emotional discipline, the ability to stay calm when others panic. But awareness creates correction. Correction creates momentum. Momentum creates transformation, no matter where you begin. Now think about the person you could become emotionally. Calmer, more intentional, less reactive, more disciplined, less distracted, more grounded. That version of you is not created overnight. It is practiced into existence daily. Now here is another hidden truth. The people who eventually achieve lasting freedom are usually not obsessed with looking successful. They become obsessed with living intentionally. That shift changes everything. Intentional mornings, intentional spending, intentional relationships, intentional habits, intentional focus, intentional living creates aligned lives, and aligned lives create peace. Now imagine no longer needing chaos to feel stimulated, no longer needing purchases to feel important, no longer needing comparison to feel motivated, just clarity. That is wealth, real wealth. Now listen carefully to this final core message. Money is not the goal. Freedom is, peace is, time is, health is, presence is, purpose is. Money simply becomes one of the tools helping protect those things. Never reverse the order. Now maybe this audiobook reached you during a difficult season. Maybe you are rebuilding, recovering, learning, trying to break cycles nobody around you escaped. Listen carefully. You are not behind. You are becoming aware. And awareness changes everything if followed by action. Do not underestimate small disciplined changes. 1 hour protected daily, 1 investment habit, 1 reduced distraction, 1 healthier routine, 1 emotional pause before impulse. Tiny actions, repeated consistently, create extraordinary lives. That is how transformation truly happens. Quietly. Now imagine your future self looking back at this exact moment. What would they thank you for? For finally budgeting seriously? For finally controlling emotional spending? For finally protecting your focus? For finally investing consistently? For finally choosing peace over performance? Those decisions matter more than you realize right now, because every repeated action becomes identity eventually, and identity becomes destiny. Now listen carefully to this final sentence before we close this audiobook. The people who quietly master themselves eventually become impossible to control through fear, distraction, or emotional chaos. And that is the highest form of wealth. If this audiobook resonated deeply with you, let it become more than inspiration. Let it become action. Leave a comment sharing the biggest shift in mindset you experienced while listening. Share this audiobook with someone who needs to reclaim control over their future. And subscribe if you are committed to building a life based on discipline, peace, focus, and long-term freedom instead of temporary validation. Because this is bigger than money. This is about becoming the kind of person capable of building a meaningful life intentionally, 1 disciplined day at a time, 1 decision at a time, 1 future-changing habit at a time. And your next chapter begins now.